And now we're in the ninth episode, I believe, of Alexander's Conquest series, the Battle of Jaxartes. So yeah, let's get to it.
Alexander's campaign against Persia had started with, on the face of it, a clear objective: avenge the Persian attacks on Greece. By any metric, Alexander had achieved that aim. Alexander had defeated the Persian king twice, and he was now dead. The heartland of the Persian Empire had been taken, and the ceremonial capital sacked. After the death of Darius, though, Alexander's grander ambitions became more and more apparent, often leading to friction with some of his Macedonian officers. In this episode, we shall see how Alexander's campaign developed from a revenge mission to a total conquest of the Persian Empire, and how Alexander's faction began to show signs of cracks.
I can't wait.
Following the pursuit and death of Darius, Alexander rested his men for a time at Hekatompilos. With the aims of the League of Corinth fulfilled, Alexander dismissed the majority of his forces from the Greek city-states, approximately 600 cavalry and 7,000 infantry. They were all paid handsomely, and those that requested to remain as mercenaries were rewarded even more generously. Alexander's numbers were soon further supplemented by 300 cavalry and 2,600 infantry reinforcements from Lydia, and 3,000 sent by Antipater. His army, including the reinforcements that had arrived the previous year at Babylon, now numbered something in the ballpark of 30,000 heavy infantry, 7,000 light infantry and missile troops, and 6,500 cavalry, a total of 43,500. The departure of the Greek forces, however, encouraged the Macedonian contingents to think that they would also be returning home, and many even began making preparations for the journey.
Then Alexander's like, no. He's like, awesome, we did it, guys. We defeated the Persians, the king is dead, the cities are ours, I think we're done. And Alexander's just sitting there like, no, there's still the rest of the world to take, you know? Oh, man.
Alexander, though, had already begun planning to take his army further east than any Greek had gone before, and made an impassioned speech to his men. He pointed out that although they had successfully conquered much of the Persian Empire, the subjects had still not been subdued, and that there were many other nations who would threaten their gains if they turned back now. In Alexander's view, we must either give up what we have taken, or we must seize what we do not yet hold. It would not be the last time that Alexander would have to make such a speech. Nevertheless, Alexander's words, alongside even more generous payments to his soldiers, ensured their loyalties.
Yeah, that's the thing. Alexander constantly has to keep his soul because they're done. The main objective seems done, and now he's like forcing everyone to keep going. And like that's a huge thing, right? Like Alexander loses the army, everything else is lost. So it's this constant balancing game of just keeping them loyal, even though they're like war weary and homesick. I know homesickness a lot. It's not a fun feeling. I can't imagine having to spend like 10 years away from home, you know? And then seemingly, I guess there's some of their perspectives for no reason, right? Like, hey, we're done. Why are we still doing this? Like, you know? So I actually sympathize a lot with the Macedonian soldiers, you know, of just wanting to go home after a while, I feel.
With Bessus having fled to Bactria, Alexander began a slow pursuit, aiming to subjugate the remaining Persian provinces en route, starting with Hyrcania. After some minor skirmishes, Alexander was met by a group of Persian nobles, including Nebuzanes, the satrap of Hyrcania, and one of Bessus's co-conspirators. Bessus's coup had been hastily carried out, and since he had retreated towards Bactria, Hyrcania had been left almost deserted, with Alexander's army on their doorstep. Nebuzanes saw the writing on the wall and surrendered. The remaining Greek mercenaries under Patron that had served Darius had also fled to Hyrcania, and they too sent envoys to Alexander offering terms of surrender, an offer which Alexander accepted, adding another 1,500 to his army. As part of Nebuzanes' surrender, he also gave a number of gifts to Alexander, one of which was a young eunuch called Bagoes. Bagoas, we are told, had previously been a favourite of Darius's, and would later become a favourite and lover of Alexander. Such relationships were by no means rare among Macedonian kings, as Archelaus I and Philip II both also had younger male lovers. It is likely that Nabozannes was aware of this, and gifted Bagoas to Alexander with instructions that the eunuch would endear himself to the king in order to make the surrender as smooth as possible. If this was the intent, then it was successful, with Nabozannes spared. Alexander next subjugated the Mardians, defeating an army of 8,000 of them in the process. The Mardians were renowned horsemen, and Alexander took many of their horses as tribute to replace the thousands that had so far been lost. Though the campaign was progressing well, Alexander's growing Persianization was starting to become a problem. He had taken to wearing elements of Persian dress.
Yeah, I've heard about Alexander dressing like a Persian, and just everyone else being like, no, we don't like this, dude. And I think it really was an effort of Alexander to merge, because Alexander realizes, I know he never got the chance to fully... Oh, wait. Yeah, I do feel that Alexander did want to culturally unify his empire, but he never got to that point. These are just the beginning or seeds of him attempting to. Because Alexander was still in conquest mode. I believe every empire has certain stages. The growth/conquest phase. And then next is the realizing you're big enough, you don't need any more, and then to the consolidation stage. And eventually I would say like the third one is like the decline through time. I feel like Alexander was still in the first part, the expansion part. He never reached a point where it's like, okay, we're big enough now. Even like the Romans reached that point where like, okay, this empire is too big now. We just need to focus on ruling it. Alexander probably may have gotten to that point later on or sooner, we don't know. But he was still at that point. He never got to the point where he could just consolidate and rule it. So, yeah, that's a bit unfortunate, though. You do see seeds of him wanting to combine, like Ammon Zeus, right? Like, combine all kinds of customs with the Greeks. I think he even married a Persian woman just to show, yeah, we're mixing. But again, the Greeks, I assume most people back then were xenophobic in that, what are you doing? Why are you mixing with this other group of people instead of your own, So, unfortunately, that's an issue Alexander never fully got to deal with. So, I don't know. That's just what I think.
Including the Persian royal diadem, accepted Asians into his court, gave Persian cloaks to his companions to wear, indulged more and more in Persian luxuries, and even ordered that 30,000 Persian boys be taught Greek and the Macedonian style of fighting. For the ancient authors, this Persianization was a source of serious criticism against Alexander, and even during Alexander's lifetime, it was divisive. Some of his officers, namely his childhood friends like Hephaestion and Ptolemy, were welcoming of blending Persian and Hellenic cultures, but the older officers in Alexander's army who had served under Philip, such as Parmenion, his son Philotas, and Cletus the Black, were more critical. It would prove to be a dangerous divide. Following his conquests of Hyrcania and Mardia, Alexander pushed further east towards Bactria. The Parthian satrap quickly submitted to Alexander, as did the satrap of Aria, Satybazanes. Shortly after Alexander had left Aria though, Satybazanes killed the Macedonian garrison stationed there, and tried to incite a revolt, forcing Alexander to quickly double back to protect his rear. Just 2 days after the revolt began, Alexander had arrived on the scene. Satybazanes himself managed to escape to Bactria with 2,000 cavalry, but the troops he left behind were quickly surrounded by Alexander and killed. Alexander pushed on, taking Drangiana and preparing to spend the winter there. It was at this point that the division between Philip's older officers and Alexander's first became a major problem, in a series of events well known as the Philotas Affair. One of the royal pages, Dimnus, planned a conspiracy to assassinate Alexander. Amongst those involved were Demetrius, one of Alexander's personal bodyguards, and Nicomachus, Dimnus's lover. Nicomachus in turn told his brother, Ciballinus, about the plot, who immediately took the information to Philotas, the commander of Alexander's companions. Philotas's brother had recently died, and his grief may have affected his decision, but for whatever reason, Philotas decided not to inform Alexander. Frustrated, Ciballinus instead went to a different officer, who arranged for an audience between Alexander and Ciballinus, who told him about the plot. Alexander immediately sent soldiers to round up the conspirators, Dimnus killing himself before he could be captured, but the others being taken alive. Philotas was also seized. Philotas defended himself, saying that he had genuinely believed it to be just gossip, but also recognized that he had been mistaken. Alexander initially accepted this and forgave Philotas, but later consulted his most trusted officers about the matter. Though Philotas was a talented cavalry commander, he was not particularly popular with many of his peers, who often considered him arrogant and obnoxious, and were jealous of his powerful position. They all turned on him, convincing Alexander that Philotas must be put on trial, and also suggesting that if Philotas was involved, his father Parmenion likely was as well. The following day, Philotas, and by extension Parmenion, was put on trial for treason. Philotas defended himself well, pointing out that neither Dimnus nor Nicomachus had ever implicated him, and that there was no evidence against him, that when Ciballinus approached him about the plot, he made no attempt to silence him, and that he had no real motive, again insisting that he only made an admittedly bad mistake. Nevertheless, it was clear that his fate had effectively already been decided. In the council following the trial, Craterus, Hephaestion, and Coenus convinced Alexander and the other officers that Philotas should be tortured for more information. Craterus, Hephaestion, and Coenus had all fought alongside Philotas for years, and Coenus was even his brother-in-law. Nevertheless, it was these three that personally oversaw the torture, some sources also claiming that Alexander listened to the torture from the other side of a curtain. After many hours of brutal torture, Philotas eventually confessed to having been involved in the plot, also naming his father Parmenion as a conspirator.
Wait, let me hear that. There is some dispute about whether or not Philotas did name his father as co-conspirator while being tortured. Either way, Parmenion's fate was sealed as he was too powerful and now with too large a vendetta to be left alive. Yeah, I'm not sure how involved Philotas actually was. I'm getting the impression that this confession was just to make the torture stop. It's kind of like those false torture confessions. It's like, yeah, if you torture someone enough, they're just gonna say whatever you want them to say to make it stop. So I don't actually know about that, but still, him not informing Alexander is still a big detriment. And obviously shows, I think, a lack of vigilance in protecting him. Even if this is just gossip, you know, I'm not sure how many gossip rumors there was in the army of killing Alexander. I'm not sure if it was a normal occurrence or not, but I'm willing to bet it wasn't. So I feel like if you're informed about this with anyone, you probably should take initiative. So I think definitely, I don't believe he was involved in the plot in terms of like being approached and being in on it, but he obviously contributed, or I think somewhat endorsed it through his silence. And again, you know, Parmenion had to go. Like, they killed him, his son, and then they sent assassins to quickly kill Parmenion. And it's true, Parmenion obviously couldn't be left alive, because even if he... I don't know, there's been speculation that he didn't know about all of this, that he actually was loyal, but the thing is, obviously, if his son's dead, that's gonna cause a huge rift between him and Alexander, even if he is innocent, you know, like, and uninvolved. And Parmenion, as we've seen, is so powerful, almost like Alexander's right-hand guy, his position in the army and whatnot. So Alexander made the call the right call of getting rid of him too before he became a potential rival out of grief for his dead son. So again, but I do kind of feel bad because Parmenion really did seem competent, and assuming that the theory is he didn't know about his son's treachery, that somewhat innocent but had to go because of how powerful and deadly he was. So yeah, those are my 2 cents or thoughts on the whole matter.
To having been involved in the plot, also naming his father Parmenion as a conspirator. All the named conspirators, including Philotas, were executed, and 2 of Alexander's companions, Cleander and Sitalces, were sent to race back to Ecbatana to kill Parmenion. When they arrived, they handed a letter to Parmenion citing his son's crimes before assassinating him. Hearing of the popular general's death, the soldiers at Ecbatana almost immediately erupted into protest until Cleander and Sitalces read out the letter detailing the crimes of Philotas. Even despite this, the soldiers demanded that Parmenion be given a funeral with full military honors, a request that Alexander allowed. The obvious question is, was there any truth in the accusation that Philotas was involved? The most probable scenarios are that Philotas either allowed the plot to happen but was not involved in the planning, or that he genuinely thought that the conspiracy was not a serious threat and made a fatal error in judgment by not informing Alexander. Either way, the affair gave Alexander and his officers the perfect opportunity to clean the house. Parmenion had been one of the most experienced, talented, and popular officers under Alexander's command, and was crucial to the victories at Issus and Gaugamela. Similarly, Philotas had played an important role in Alexander's victories at Thebes, Miletus, and notably at the Persian Gates just months earlier. Nevertheless, they were both part of the Old Guard, having served under Philip. Both had criticized Alexander, Philotas even supposedly boasting in the past that he and his father deserved more of the credit than Alexander. Both were in incredibly powerful positions within the Macedonian army, and Alexander may have thought it too dangerous to have them in such grand positions without being able to entirely trust them. Alexander's officers had their own motivations. In the case of Coenus in particular, it appears likely that, because of his relation by marriage to Philotas, he was quick to distance himself from any accusations of also being involved, being one of the first to condemn his brother-in-law. The other officers were all ambitious men, and Philotas and Parmenion were both barriers to their careers. The 2 dead men would not, however, be directly replaced. Rather than risk having one man having command of such a large portion of the army, Alexander instead seems to have preferred to split their powers between numerous other officers.
Demetrius, the executed bodyguard of Alexander, was replaced with Ptolemy Lagus, the later pharaoh of Egypt.
Command of the companions being split between Cletus the Black and Hephaestion, merging the old guard with the new. The Philotas affair and subsequent reorganization had cost Alexander precious time, and so, despite it being winter, Alexander left Trangiana determined to cross the Hindu Kush and catch Bessus. The satrap of Aria was once again stirred up to revolt by Setiphanes, who had entered the province with 2,000 cavalry. However, this time Alexander would suffer no delays, pushing onwards and sending Erigyius, one of his close friends, to put down the revolt, which he did after a difficult battle in which Setiphanes was killed by Erigyius personally. Alexander quickly subdued Arachosia, founding a city in the area in the process, before reaching the Hindu Kush, probably sometime in April 329. The 2-week-long crossing of the mountains was difficult, Alexander and his men trudging through deep mountain snow. Many of his men suffered from frostbite, some went snowblind, while others simply perished from the cold. Alexander, however, had chosen to take this particularly dangerous route into Bactria, specifically because it would outflank Bessus in Ionis. This plan worked. Bessus, alarmed by Alexander's rapid advance, abandoned the province, taking what army he could and crossing the Oxus into Sogdiana, destroying any resources he could in the process to try and slow the Macedonians. Alexander quickly set about subduing the area, easily storming and taking the major cities of Bactria. In June, before leaving for the river Oxus, Alexander dismissed those who were either too old or whose time of service had been completed, rewarding them handsomely. Among them were the remnants of the Thessalian cavalry. Some of these men had returned home the previous year, some had died, leaving only a small number that had stayed on as mercenaries. These too were now dismissed, with good pay. He and his army then set off, marching across the waterless and burning desert. It was a long march, and cost Alexander even more men to dehydration. When they finally did find water, many of his soldiers, drinking too quickly, choked and died. Their troubles continued when they reached the Oxus itself. Bessus had made sure to burn the boats he had used to cross the river, and the area had no timber Alexander could use for constructing other boats or bridges. Undeterred, Alexander ordered his men to cross the river, creating rafts by using skins that the soldiers used for their tents, filling them with straw and sewing them shut. This move proved the final straw for Bessus's faction.
They really thought he had Alexander there. Oh, and I just find that funny. Bessus really killed Darius and just proved to be incompetent. Like, if you're at least you're gonna use your power, be like, I don't know, smart afterwards. I don't know.
Just as Bessus had done to Darius, Bessus's nobles, led in part by a man called Spitamenes, turned on him, keeping him under guard and sending word to Alexander informing him of events. Alexander quickly sent a force of 4,000 infantry and 1,600 cavalry, possibly under Ptolemy's command, to seize Bessus. When Bessus was captured, he was, on Alexander's orders, flogged, stripped naked, and bound in a wooden collar. Alexander handed Bessus to Darius III's brother, who had his ears and nose cut off, a traditional Persian punishment, before eventually having him executed in Bactria. Alexander marched through Sogdiana, easily subduing and garrisoning cities in the area, including Syropolis, a city founded by Cyrus the Great almost 200 years earlier, and Maracanda, the capital of the province. He also founded yet another Alexandria on the banks of the Jaxartes, Alexandria Escati, the furthest Alexandria. It finally seemed that Alexander was the undisputed king of Persia. However, things were not as simple as they seemed. While in Sogdiana, a local tribe, numbering as many as 20,000 according to some sources, attacked Alexander's men while they were foraging before retreating to high ground. Alexander was able to use his lighter troops to storm the position and win the battle, but was badly wounded with an arrow to the leg. To make matters worse, the recently conquered provinces of Sogdiana and Bactria both rose up in rebellion, led by Spitamenes. 7 of the cities that Alexander had taken, including Syropolis, had their garrisons massacred by local tribes, while Spitamenes himself besieged Maracanda. Alexander split his army into 3, a few thousand under Phanuces being sent to relieve Maracanda, more under Craterus besieging Syropolis, where most of the rebel forces were focused, while Alexander focused on storming 5 of the smaller cities. In doing so, he hoped to defeat the enemy in detail, damaging the morale of those in Syropolis. Alexander wasted no time besieging any of his targets. He attacked Gaza first, using his missile troops and siege engines to clear the enemy from the walls before using siege ladders to break inside and putting all the men there to the sword. The next 2 cities suffered the same treatment, the Macedonians using siege ladders to quickly scale the walls, once again slaughtering the males inside. The rebels in the final 2 cities, seeing smoke and refugees flowing from the other 3, promptly abandoned their positions, many later being cut down by Alexander's cavalry. According to Arrian, taking these 5 cities had taken Alexander just 2 days. The Macedonian king then marched to meet Craterus at Syropolis. Filled with 15,000 rebels and with strong walls, Alexander initially planned to construct siege rams to batter the walls down. He noticed, however, that the river channel leading into Syropolis had dried, offering a passage into the city. Ordering a diversionary attack on the main fortifications, Alexander secretly led his Hypaspists, Agrianians and archers up the channel and into the city. With the rebels distracted by the attack on the walls, Alexander's force was able to open the gates from the inside before being noticed and having to fall back to the marketplace. The rebels abandoned the walls, determined to kill Alexander, and fierce fighting broke out, during which Alexander was again wounded with a stone to the neck and head, which knocked him unconscious. Nevertheless,
Yeah, I had heard about the many injuries of Alexander. Like he took a lot of injuries in his life, and something that contributed to his mental, some of his more questionable behavior later down the line, all the injuries and whatnot. But yeah, the guy, like I said, it's so dangerous leading from the front because he could literally die any minute. It's amazing he fought for as long as he did without ever dying in battle, you know what I mean? Like, that's just luck.
Open gates and abandoned walls allowed the rest of his army to pour into the city, and Syropolis was soon taken back, with 8,000 rebels dying in the process. The 7th and final city fell soon after to a rapid assault. Sometime around October, Alexander moved to Alexandria Escati, building defences around the city and settling prisoners taken from the Sogdian cities as well as some of his older troops there. However, on the other side of the river, the nomadic Saka were beginning to stir. They were simultaneously frustrated by the founding of Alexandria Escati, which in their opinion was in their sphere of influence, and were eager to exploit the chaotic situation for their own benefit. A strong cavalry force, under the command of Cathasis, brother of the Sake king, gathered on the north bank of the river. With the Bactrians and Sogdians still in revolt, Alexander had to choose to either expose his northern flank to deal with the revolt, or allow the revolt to continue but secure his borders. He chose the latter, hoping to defeat the Scythian threat before it grew in size. Alexander, his leg still healing and his voice ragged from the wound at Syropolis, amassed his army on the bank opposite the Saka, to the northeast of Alexandria Escati. He once again ordered his men to prepare rafts to cross the river, in the same manner as they had at the Oxus. Before the battle began, however, a Sacan ambassador arrived, insisting that Alexander withdraw his force, and warning him, "Beware, lest while you strive to reach the top, you fall with the very branches you have grasped. Even the lion has sometimes been the food of the smallest bird, and rust consumes iron." Alexander dismissed the ambassador and prepared his army for battle the following day. The exact numbers on either side are unknown. However, due to there being almost no mention of Alexander's phalanx in the battle, we can presume that he only took his lighter troops and cavalry, approximately 9,000 of the former and 6,000 of the latter. We can only guess at the size of the Saka force, but given the fact that no source mentions it being significantly larger or smaller, it was likely of comparable size, composed purely of cavalry. The Sake had deployed themselves as close as possible to the river on the other bank, hoping to stop the Macedonians before they could set foot on their side. Alexander, however, set up siege weapons to fire at them from across the river, a tactic he had pioneered during his Illyrian campaign. These missiles forced the Sake to withdraw out of range, and Alexander then gave the order for his army to begin the crossing. Men on the front of the makeshift rafts knelt, providing a screen with their shields, and protecting those who were rowing from the hail of arrows as they closed in on the Saka's bank. Once they reached the other side, Alexander's Agrianians and archers immediately attacked the Saka, providing covering fire for the cavalry and infantry to disembark. Nevertheless, in order to secure victory, Alexander would have to find a way of pinning the enemy's nimble, all-cavalry army. Just as he had done previously at the Granicus, Alexander decided to make a tactical sacrifice to gain an advantage. About 1,000 footmen and a portion of the auxiliary cavalry were sent forward to attack. The Saka deftly avoided their charge, surrounding the small force, riding in circles and firing arrows into their midst. This was precisely what Alexander had wanted. Gathering his cavalry, Hypaspists, Agrianians...
This is a unique battle. He doesn't have his signature failings. Alexander's wounded. he's facing a all cavalry army. Like I said, the circumstances of this battle are actually pretty unique, and I like the way he's doing it.
And other light infantry, Alexander advanced. As he closed in, a detachment of the companions and light cavalry was sent to charge the Saka on the flanks of his surrounded men, while he led the light infantry and the rest of the companions in an attack on their center. Alexander had now successfully pinned a large portion of the Saka force, and many were killed in the ensuing fight. It had been a brilliant display of Alexander's combined arms tactics. The entire Saka force quickly began to withdraw, pursued by Alexander and his...
Yeah, I really like that. The combined force arms tactics of Alexander is another part of what made him so great. Being able to balance out all these different branches and use them to their full potential. I just think Alexander is what made Alexander such a great general, you know?
His cavalry. Eventually, though, a mixture of nightfall, fatigue, and diarrhea caused by the local water forced Alexander to call off the pursuit. Approximately 1,000 Saka had been killed and a further 150 captured, while by Rufus's account, Alexander had lost 160 with a further 1,000 wounded. A peace offering was soon sent to Alexander by the Scythian king, and Alexander, in no position to continue a war on this front, accepted. Alexander had now secured his borders. Nonetheless, within his own borders there was still trouble. Bactria and Sogdiana had still not been completely subdued. Spitamenes had withdrawn from Maracanda when Pharnicus had closed in, but he was still at large, a thorn in Alexander's side. Moreover, there was still growing discontent in Alexander's own ranks from older officers who had served under Philip. We'll cover these topics and more in the following episodes, so make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button to see them. Please consider liking, commenting and sharing, it helps immensely.
Heck yeah. So I'm gonna jump towards part 10 tomorrow. I'll see you then.